Hey Lisa, it's Winnie. Letting you know our meeting actually starts at noon, not at 11.
Oh, okay, perfect. I'll log back in. Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
bye.
Bye.
Hi, everyone. This is Winnie with the West Side Cities call. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, okay. I thought you said couldn't hear me. We're gonna wait for others to join, but wanted to spend some time to troubleshoot any issues that you may have. Um,
Okay, Winnie, just checking to see, can you see me and hear me? That's the
I
bottom.
could, yes, perfect.
Okay, great.
So Robert, as a voting member, oh, Megan's on. Hi, Jim. So Megan, I don't know if you received my message. Cecilia is unable to join the meeting.
Yes.
Okay.
Got it. Thanks.
All right. I wanted to do a quick tutorial on protocols, but I'll wait for additional people to sign on.
I'll just ask for the action items, we'll vote on we can vote on A through D as a one vote, right? Because will we do roll call vote? I guess so.
I'm guessing, and I can do that role, or either you or Lauren. We'll ask Lauren. I think you might have to do the roll call vote. And at this point during the action, I'm just going to unmute the voting members.
Okay.
Yeah, but then after that, during the presentations and discussions, I might have to mute everyone and use the hand raise function. Are you all familiar with the hand raise function on Zoom?
Yeah.
Robert, you're on mute. So you have,
where is the hand raise function?
okay, let me show you now. Hi, Lauren. Here, let me share my screen. So once I share my screen, I won't be able to see your faces. So, but I'll still be able to hear you. So if you unmute yourself, actually, I can still see everyone. That's great. Okay.
It's hard to hand raise with the shared screen.
It's easier if you go to participants and then you right click next to your name and you raise your hand. You'll see that something pops up, says raise your hand.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you, I'm hoping this looks like your screen, but basically you can unmute on the lower left-hand side, or not show your video, or if you open up the participant icon here, it'll prop open the participant window where you can unmute yourself on the lower right-hand corner and raise your hand. I'm hoping this format works. And once I see people raise their hands, it'll go in the order that people click on the button. And once you're done speaking, we just ask you to lower your hand. And then I can unmute you, or you can unmute yourself once your name is called on. If there are any issues during the meeting, you can always use the chat function. The chat function is only available between the staff and the rest of the board members and staff who are on this webinar. So just use this chat function. You can actually test it right now if you'd like, and I'll respond to you. If you have any issues, my number is here, and you also, I'm not sure if I had that emailed to you all, but stop screen here. Any questions? Do you want to try that, Robert, raising your hand?
And just a reminder that chat function is only for like technical issues, not commentary.
Right.
You know, not any business of the body.
So I'm right-clicking on me under participant, and I'm not seeing a pop-up for me to, oh, there it is down on the bottom.
I think you have to left click it. There you go. I see your hand raised. I see
Okay.
someone else. Lauren Meister just raised her hand. Oh, I also had the function to lower your hand. Great. Jim, I'm going to mute you just to limit any background noise. Riley is also on this webinar. He works at our office, so he would be helping me managing the chat function if you can. And also, we are accepting comments during the meeting. So far, we haven't received any comments related to any items so far, but Riley will be monitoring the emails. And at the end, when we do have public comment period, we would have Riley read that out loud. Hi, Kevin. You just joined. Do you have any questions regarding, are you familiar with Zoom? We're
I've been
doing
using Zoom more than I care to tell you, and I just checked
Okay.
it out to make sure this language working, which it is.
Great. Hi, Council Member
Heilman.
Heilman. So are you familiar with using Zoom?
I am, but can you tell me the meeting ID? Because I'd like to sign in on my computer and I'm on my cell phone right now.
Oh, okay. I sent you the information to your email if you received that, but
I'm just going to sign.
actually,
I'll sign out here.
Okay. Okay, sounds great.
So how many of you are using Zoom for your council meetings, and how many of you are using like other technologies? I'm just curious.
I wish we were using Zoom. The one that we're using I find much more awkward than Zoom, but apparently the security issues led our information department to go with something called Blue Jeans.
Oh, okay. We have WebEx.
And we're using GoToMeeting, which seems to work fine.
Huh. We're not doing like the visual component to the meetings, which is kind of unfortunate, but it does simplify. So it might be the new normal for a while. So
Does become the new normal. That's one reason I'm hoping we go to something other than Blue Jeans. I saw my colleague Gleam Davis give a thumbs down when I mentioned Blue Jeans. It's just very awkward, and chairing the meeting is hard because it's difficult for you to tell when somebody wants to speak. The way their chat works is kind of counterintuitive, and the new messages come in at the bottom instead of at the top. So you don't always see that somebody's raised their hand and wants to speak, which is frustrating, as you could imagine, in a council meeting.
and you're no Luddite, Kevin.
No,
You're a pro.
I have a pretty good idea of how to do this sort of thing.
Yeah.
If I find it difficult, it's got a pretty steep learning curve. It's not just there's a learning curve, it doesn't seem capable of doing the things. Now, I do recognize that Zoom is subject to Zoom bombing, and I think we've locked this meeting down pretty well. But I have been on some meetings, not city council meetings, but other meetings that have been bombed, and it's not that big a deal. You don't need to be such a snowflake about it as some people are, but it does certainly break the flow of a meeting to have somebody come in and make some really crass comment to somebody who's trying to speak. and I've seen it happen.
Lauren, how should we do just introduction? Should I just call on everyone's name or just do a roll call of the voting members? What are your thoughts?
Why don't we just do a roll call of the voting members so we know who's here? Because I think you can see everybody who's participating by their name, right?
Yes. I think the participants can, but I don't know if the attendees can.
Well, I don't see everybody. For some people, I just see names.
Right. Oh, on the screen, yes.
Turn on your camera, shy people.
Well, at
With the
least the voting members should have their screens on. Or if you're speaking, you can turn on the video. What are your thoughts, Lauren?
Yeah, perhaps the voting members can say if they know if anyone else from their city or staff are attending, but it might be more manageable if we just do roll call that way.
Okay.
And just a reminder to everybody that we will take all votes by voice vote. So we'll have to go around and get everybody's vote for any action item.
So Lauren, I was thinking of muting everyone except when we do action item, we'll unmute just the voting members so they can verbally say it. But after when we do presentations, we will use the raise hand function. So for the voting members or speakers, let me know. You can feel free to use the chat function. I'll actually share it really quick because I know more people are signing on. Let me share my screen really quick. So I'm hoping this is what it looks like on your screen. If you click on the lower left-hand side buttons, you can unmute yourself or start or close your video, your camera. Here, the participants, if you left click it, it'll open and prompt open a participants window on the right-hand side, which you can see all of the panelists and attendees for this meeting. And then if you look on the right-hand bottom, you'll also see some buttons to unmute yourself or raise your hand. And we ask that if you would like to speak to raise your hand, and I'll call on people who are in the order of the people who raise their hand to allow you to speak. And once you're done speaking, we'll lower your hand. There is also a chat function for the panelists here in the middle. Feel free to test it. Riley will be managing all of the chats if you have any technical difficulties. And that is it. Any questions in terms of logistics? Yeah, Lauren.
I was gonna say, and then Winnie, before we move past each agenda item, will you just acknowledge if there's any emailed public comment that came in and you can read it before we go through each item?
Yes.
And before
so Riley, so Riley, who is on the screen, he will be managing all of the chat and emails coming through. So the emails we're still accepting during the meeting period. So far we've checked, there hasn't been any public comments, but Riley will be checking, and our public comment period is at the end of the meeting. So we'll ask Riley again to check his emails and verbally let us know and read the comments out loud.
Okay, if anything comes in the meantime on a particular item, it would be helpful if you could read it to the board before they vote. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And Riley, you can feel free to unmute yourself if there is a comment during the meeting related to an item.
Okay, sounds good. I will.
Thank you. And I think that is it. Megan, would you like to start the meeting officially?
Yes, well, hello, everybody. I'd like to call this meeting to order and welcome you to our first online Westside City's COG meeting. If we can have each voting member identify themselves and then also mention whether there is somebody from their city joining you as well. So we'll start with the city of West Hollywood.
Hi, Megan. Hi, everyone. John Heilman, I'm the voting member, and my colleague Lauren Meister is here as well. And I believe that Hernan Molina is here, as well as Corey Plank from the city. I don't know if anyone else from the city is joined us or has joined us.
Great, thank you. Now Beverly Hills.
I'm Bob Wunderlich. I'm here, and from the screen, I see, or at least I saw in the past Jim Latta and Cindy Owens's name, but I don't see a picture of her, video of her. And that's all I'm aware of. But
Great, thank you. Santa Monica.
Yeah, Mayor Kevin McKeown from Santa Monica. I'm the voting delegate. Also here is our alternate Gleam Davis council member. And I see two of our staff members so far, Anuj Gupta, and somewhere here I saw Lisa Orduno. But I have more than one window, so now it's, let me double check that. Yes, Elisa is still here and I don't see any other city Santa Monica staff yet.
Excellent. Los Angeles.
Hi, this is Debbie Diner Harris with Councilmember Paul Koretz's office, and Steve Liu from our Chief Legislative Analyst office is on the line. I don't believe there's any other City of LA representatives.
Okay, thank you. And we'll give a time at the very end for people to announce themselves if they haven't, if they're from the cities and haven't been called out. All right, Los Angeles County.
Hi, everybody. Fernando Morales with the Office of Supervisor Sheila Kuehl. I believe I'll be the only one joining on her behalf.
Great, thank you. And Culver City, Megan Sally Wells, voting member. I have, let's see, my colleague Thomas Small, Helen Chin, Michelle Williams, Diana Chang, and Shelley Wolfberg. A lot of Culver City in the house today. And I think, I'm not sure if my colleague Alex Fish is joining us or not. He is the alternate for Culver City. I don't see him yet. So were there any other folks from cities that hadn't been called on or announced themselves?
Hi, this is Gabriella Yap from the City of Beverly Hills.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Excellent. So I guess that can, Winnie, that can serve as a roll call, right? Yeah, okay, good. Now we have our action items. Did you, Winnie, did you want to present on that?
Sure. Let me actually share my, if I share my screen, are you able to see people's faces? I just want to.
No, you are not.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
But it was in the process of it sharing.
Yeah, it was in the process of sharing, but oh, hi, Patrick. I don't know if that was you. I'll just go through the PDF instead.
Some of what happens may be client specific. When you went to sharing for a moment there, things
the first action item. Sorry, you were kind of breaking out. Can you repeat that question?
If it was me you're talking to, I was saying that what happens when you go to sharing mode may be client specific. On a Mac, at least, it moved all of the people's pictures to one side of the screen, and I could see your screen at the same time. On a mobile device, it may act very differently. So we may all end up seeing different things, is what I'm saying.
Okay, should I still share my screen as?
Well, it was working for me, but I don't know what everybody else is on, so.
Right, and it was working for me as well.
Okay, let me share my screen. Might be better that way. So that way we can follow the items.
So what I see now is the gallery of our videos on one side of my screen and your screen on the other, and you can slide the middle of it back and forth if you want to see more people or fewer people or a bigger version of the screen.
Okay, great. Now I can also see you all. Okay, so now you see my screen, which should say item 3, approval of the February 13 meeting minutes.
Yes.
Okay, so how should we do? Should we do it by each item?
I would move we approve.
The vote. Okay.
I'll second that motion.
So we actually have we have about 4 items A, B, C, and D. Because we're doing voice votes, I would suggest that we do those all as one vote. And so if there were any discussions on items A, B, C, or D, then now would be the time to have the discussion. The first one is approval of the minutes. The second is the SCAG Transportation Committee representative appointment. The third is SCAG Community Economic and Human Development representative appointment. And then D is the Metro West Side Central Service Council representative nomination. For each of those nominations, we have 1 applicant, so it seems pretty clear cut, but if anybody had any discussion or questions, now would be the time.
Megan, I will move all of the items.
And I will second all 4.
Excellent. So we have a motion for action items A, B, C, and D. I'm leaving off E because that's a discussion item. So for all, we have a motion and a second. And we'll proceed for a roll call of the vote. West Hollywood?
Aye.
Beverly Hills?
Yes.
Santa Monica?
Yes.
Los Angeles? Oh, Los Angeles is not a voting member, right? Just to represent, sorry about that. LA County?
That would be Fernando.
And Fernando, you can vote, right? You're the
he's
a voting member.
Let me see. I think he's on mute.
Fernando?
You may have stepped away.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Is that okay? Lauren?
I think we have a majority.
We have a majority.
Okay, and Culver City votes yes as well. I'll also note that my colleague Alex Fish is here, but he's in the listen only mode. So we're trying to see if he has his own unique login. Shelley is.
Okay, I can actually fix that.
Okay, great. That would be great.
Actually,
right.
Riley, if you're able to have Alex Fish as a panelist, and are you able to do that, Riley?
Yes, I think as long as his email has been sent in one of your emails.
It wasn't. So if you go on, sorry, technical difficulties. Here, I could do that. I think I just have to stop the screen. I think that's easier. Okay. Alex Fish has been promoted to a panelist, so he has ability to unmute and show video. Oh, and Fernando came back on. Thank you for the chat. We were just doing roll call vote of the 3 items.
Great. If I was missed, I'm sorry about that. My internet kicked out.
That's okay. Thank you. So we have a unanimous vote for action items A through D. And thank you for bringing my colleague on. Now on to item E, which is more for discussion, regional priority infrastructure investment. Winnie, did you want to give us a report on that?
I'll do it very quickly and briefly, only because this was more of Cecilia's item that she wanted to bring to the board, and unfortunately, she's unable to make this meeting. We have our monthly meetings with our sub-regional COG directors, and there was some interest on using this opportunity with the stimulus package from the federal government and other state funding to come together as the sub-regional COGs on some priority investments that we could advocate on our behalf. And the three that she highlighted was regional broadband. As you all know, with the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of us are going virtual, and there are some communities and members who don't have the adequate access to broadband Wi-Fi. And I know South Bay City's COG is doing their regional broadband project, and that's something that we could model. And then secondly, with Metro, and we're seeing a decreasing of sales tax that will impact our revenues and funding under all of the measures. And we wanted to make sure that we find a way to still accelerate all of the improvements outlined in all of our measures, as well as the next gen bus. And then lastly, EV charging station infrastructure. And I know that's something that the West Side is interested in. For Cecilia, I think for her, it was more of a discussion for all of you, and seeing that if there is potential action, if we have the option to work with the other sub-regional executive directors to generate these priority infrastructure investments. Again, if we could also defer this to our next meeting with Cecilia at the meeting, but welcome to any preliminary discussion now. No need for any action item.
Were there questions or comments from the members or city representatives?
Yeah, I put my hand up, but can you see that or can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Kevin.
I would suggest, just in general, although we're not going to have a great discussion or decision today, that we ask that whatever happened be in keeping with the mobility priorities we've already set, such that I would hope that not a whole lot of this goes into vehicles except for EVs, and that the money be put into things like rail and bikes, and perhaps the broadband. I'm willing to consider that. But I think we're all enjoying the fact that our streets are pretty empty of cars right now, despite all that means for the economy. And I would hate to see us put whatever extra money is coming in into making it possible for more cars to return when this is over. So let's keep with our principles.
Winnie, do you know if this is kind of an either or thing? Because this is, if I'm understanding correctly, is this is like, and may possibly future stimulus money, right? From a future bill that people are just hoping will come in, but it's not a sure thing.
Not a sure thing. An opportunity for us to advocate for the funding for these types of priority infrastructure. Okay. So that we'll have a letter in handy, and that we have buy-in from the other sub-regional COG directors.
Okay. Were there any other questions or comments from other members?
Megan, this is John Heilman. I agree with what Kevin said. I think if we're going to do this, this seems like the priorities that were identified by another subregion and not necessarily our priorities. So I think if we're going to participate in some joint activity, we should be really reviewing our priorities, transit, other types of infrastructure that we've already had regional agreement on, and elevate those as priorities and we want to partner with other subregions, that's great. That will amplify our voice, but I don't want us to just rubber stamp what they did and say, yeah, we're fine with that.
Right. And we've already set kind of what our work, priorities are internally. I mean, it seems like the two mobility ones, the next jet, the bus and mobility fit in with what our current work plan is. I actually asked our IT director, Michelle Williams, to join the call because if there is regional or national investment in broadband, then even though it might not be one of our top priorities, if it's there, maybe we should be ready to get some of that funding. I know the city of Santa Monica was early on in getting municipal broadband. Culver City has followed suit, but we only have it for businesses and our schools. And, the next step for us, but we don't have money for, is to actually provide it to residents. And so we're interested in expanding access and on an equity model. And I believe Santa Monica has a good model where some of their subsidized housing actually gets free broadband, right, Kevin? Yeah.
In a pilot project, a limited amount, yes. And we have a robust city fiber network called CityNet that serves businesses, including post-production, medical, and all these other people, but we don't have the ability to get it into homes yet. And so that would be where some federal money to expand this pilot program would be a very interesting thing. But again, mobility is a thing where we've already reached consensus, and I think we should stick with that while being open to the idea of the broadband expansion.
Right.
In Beverly Hills, we're partway through a fiber to the premises program. We do have a ring of fiber for some municipal locations already. We have started implementing a program that would bring fiber to businesses and residences, and it'll be a long story, but we've encountered a variety of difficulties with that we could share if other people, at some other point, if other people were launching down a similar initiative.
So I guess it's, if money becomes available for this, I think it might be positive for our cities to talk to one another about what would that look like? How would we use that money if it were there? And not to, again, it's not to suggest that we reorient what our current work plan is, but if there's an opportunity, let's get some of that money, basically.
Yeah, for the moment, the consensus is we're interested in money, right?
Yeah, for sure. Were there any other questions, comments, or discussion on this? All right, seeing none, we can go ahead and move on. Next is the Transportation Strategic Initiative.
Chair Sally Wallace, before I forget, I forgot to make this announcement. We have a new voting delegate for the city of Beverly Hills, which is actually Vice Mayor Robert Wunderlich. Councilmember John Mears will stay on as the alternate for the COG. So wanted to make that announcement. So our next item is transportation. So we have here from Metro, Craig Hoshijima. Craig, if you can show your video. If not, I will pull up your presentation. There is Craig. I will pull out your presentation so you can present and let me know when you want me to scroll to the next page, right?
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Uh-oh. We're getting echo there.
Yeah, I turned off my phone. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Whenever you're ready to go, I'm Craig Hoshijima with LA Metro with the Strategic Financial Planning Department. I'm here to talk about Metro's process to amend the Measure R ordinance. Whenever you're ready, Winnie.
Okay, do you see it?
Yes, I do. Next slide, please. So Measure R is, of course, a countywide sales tax ordinance that funds specific transportation projects. And it was approved in 2008. And it has a provision that Metro can amend the ordinance to allow for transfers. There's transfers between highway uses and transit uses. And this transfer can only happen once every 10 years. And so the 10-year time frame is coming up, and we've initiated a process to take input to see if stakeholders desire a transfer, and then to put that to the board this summer. Our process does involve outreach, and that's the purpose of this presentation to you all, is to provide you with information about the transfer and see if you have any input. And as I mentioned, the board is going to consider the amendment language at its June 2020 meeting. Next slide, please. This is a graphical schedule of the process. So in February, we kicked it off and we sent out an information letter to who we thought were interested stakeholders, including the subregions, including the West Side Cities subregion. We have a red arrow there. We were hoping to get any responses back by the end of March, but we're still flexible. So if you all have input, we can still accept it. We expect that the subregions, if they do have any input, they would want to deliberate on it. And we've given folks time in April and May to do so. In May, Metro staff does need to start drafting the language. And then in June, the Metro board will deliberate about the amendment. Then we've got some technical issues to deal with. We have to go to an oversight committee and notify the legislature. And unfortunately, in the state law that approved Measure R, we have to give the legislature a year advance. So we're going to have to wait for a year for the amendment to actually take place. But we don't think that's going to inhibit any of the requests that we've gotten to date from the subregions. Next slide, please. So what would be impetus for a transfer? Well, so if you want to transfer money between highway and transit, you may have a project that's currently in the Measure R ordinance that is canceled. And so an example, and something that is a real transfer request, is in the South Bay subregion. They have a highway program, and the Council of Governments there is really interested in transferring those uses to transit projects. So they would propose to cancel their highway project and transfer it to a slew of transit projects. Secondly, there could be projects that have surplus. In the West Side subregion, one of the projects that has surplus is Expo 2. We haven't officially closed out the project, but we do expect that there's going to be surplus on that project. That is, we will not have spent all the Measure R that was allowable to be spent on that project. These projects need to be closed out, though, before we can start allocating any surplus, because as we tally up the final cost, it could eat up a lot of that surplus and take away any opportunity to transfer it to another use. And then finally, debt service. That's more of a technical issue. We have to pay our debt service, the transit debt service with transit funds, and highway debt service with highway funds. And if it's a little out of balance, we've got to transfer it to be in compliance with the ordinance. That is not an issue with this transfer. It's just something to look out for in the future. Next slide, please. This graphically shows what does require an amendment and what doesn't. So in that left schematic, if you go from highway to transit or vice versa, that requires an amendment. And then the two below it, if we want to add a project or subtract a project from the Measure R expenditure plan, we do need an amendment. Those types of amendments are not limited to every 10 years, so they can happen whenever the board approves the amendment via a 2/3 board approval. The right schematic, the graphic, shows what does not require an amendment. And so any use of a highway project and another highway project, that can happen. And that happens if there is surplus. So as the example for West Side cities is Expo 2. If there's surplus on that project, the subregion can decide how to use that on another transit project. And in fact, the Metro Board took action, and it's not binding forever, but the Metro Board did take action in 2018 to apply the Expo 2 surplus to West Side 2, the West Side 2 subway project. Next slide, please. So in summary, we're seeking input from all stakeholders, including councils of governments like yourselves, to determine if you have any interest in creating a new project or canceling a project and then transferring the funds from highway to transit or vice versa. The surplus, if it exists, is eligible for use by the subregion, and it is dependent on the project actually closing out and the ultimate cost. And then finally, Metro is available to discuss, and so that's why I'm here. And another member of Metro staff, Fanny Pan, is also on the line to answer any questions that you all may have. That concludes the presentation.
Okay. Actually, Fanny is an attendee, so I will upgrade. Actually, I don't see Fanny on.
She's on the phone.
Oh, you are? Okay, but I can hear you. And also Patrick Chandler from Metro is also on the meeting. So
Oh,
they,
yes,
they
I'm
are
sorry,
all
Patrick.
available for any
I apologize.
questions.
I forgot he was going to attend.
So.
Right, do we, while we're getting the technicality there, are there questions or comments from board members?
I see Mayor, yeah.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Oh, okay. Wasn't sure I was being called on yet. Well, Craig already mentioned that the extra Expo money can be used to make the subway to the sea actually live up to its name. I'm glad to hear that. I think the other project here on the west side that we've all had consensus on is the expedited and fully funded extension of the Crenshaw line to West Hollywood. So that would be something we've already, I think, agreed was an interest of us as a region.
Yeah, surplus is not a word we hear a lot in government. How much are we talking about?
I apologize. I am just hearing bits and pieces, but I did hear a question about the amount of surplus from Expo 2. It's about 200 million. It could go down as we get final closeout cost, not significantly, but it's about 200 million at this point.
Well, it makes me extra proud to have been an Expo Construction Authority board member representing Culver City. That's great. I completely agree with what Kevin just said. Oh, and then the other piece was, is there the ability to transfer any dedicated highway monies into active transportation and transit instead? Is that's feedback you're looking for right now, or is it something we'll formalize written to Metro?
Preferably written. The sooner the better, so that the Metro board and staff, we can consider it prior to the June meeting. If you do submit anything to us that's related to this item, we will include it with the board action. I don't believe that there are any projects like South Bay has, where you would contemplate canceling it and then using those monies for a different purpose. If you have an idea of a project that you want to use on active transportation, it would be good if you would let us know exactly what that is, so we can evaluate it and submit it to our board.
Could we have a list of projects that we're talking about that would be eligible, so that we could analyze them?
Yes, we can provide that list at this point. And I've talked to your staff about this, that The Measure R projects funded for the West Side subregion include the Expo projects and the West Side project. I'm not aware of anything else. If Fanny it has access, she might be able to add some additional detail, but I'm not aware of anything else significant that is within the West Side subregion.
Right, and that list is in the agenda packet as well. Pull it up really quick.
So while you're pulling that up, Winnie, I just want to second what Kevin said earlier. I think our priority project now is the northern extension of the Crenshaw line to West Hollywood and the remainder of the region here. So I would certainly advocate that would be one of our priority projects for any money that is reallocated or saved from other projects.
So Craig, I'm pulling this up. There's 2 pages. The first one is on transit and rail. So I do see Expo on line item 4. And the West Side subway extension on line item 17. So those are the only projects within the West Side. The second page are highway projects.
I just want, Winnie just wanted to mention on the Sepulveda Pass project.
Oh, yes.
It wasn't at this point well-defined. And so currently the project encompasses 3 phases. One phase is for the express lanes through the pass. And so that doesn't go into the West Side subregion. The second phase is Valley to Westwood, and that might go into the subregion. And then the third phase is Westwood to LAX, and that might as well. The second and third phases, they're funded from Measure M, but this first project listed in Measure R really doesn't have any limitations on what it will fund. It's just it's available funding. So I haven't heard that there's excess money for Sepulveda Pass, but I should mention that technically that maybe in the we should research that. We should research whether that technically has a piece in the West Side subregion.
What I'm hearing from some of my colleagues is that it sounds like, you know, we've already set priorities internally, and it would make sense to remain consistent with the previously set priorities, those key projects that have been mentioned. Another question is, are there any other surpluses anticipated from Metro?
Well, yes, we identified surplus for projects that are not within the West Side subregion. There were several highway projects that were funded prior to Measure R being passed. I know that sounds crazy, but there were. And so Metro has always let the subregions know that once those projects are completed, they could utilize the subregion for other, and they're mostly highway projects. I think they're all highway projects. They could use those surpluses for a highway project of their choosing. And one of these projects has been completed. It was a connector between I-5 and SR-14 near Santa Clarita, and it's about $80 million of surplus. And the North County subregion has already decided how to use that surplus. There's surplus on the I-5 corridor for San Fernando Valley and the Gateway subregion to consider. And then, as I mentioned, with South Bay, they are looking at canceling a project and creating surplus and then moving that surplus over to transit uses. But other than that, we don't know of any other projects that have surplus. And I think it was unique in those circumstances that the projects were funded prior to Measure R passing, or the subregion has decided that they want to cancel the project.
Okay, thank you. Were there any other board member or city representative questions or comments?
This is Eric from
Yeah.
CD11. I just wanted to clarify, Craig, correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is that the surplus that has been identified on Expo has already been assigned to the existing, I believe, phase 3 of West Side Purple Line, and is already accounted for in that project's budget. So there isn't really a surplus on the west side available for other priorities.
Well, you're right. I mentioned that the board took an action in July 2018 to apply the surplus to West Side 2, but I don't believe that 200 million is part of the LOP yet, that it's part of the funding plan. My understanding is that it's applied in the event that there's a cost increase. If that's not the case, then I will certainly let you know that that's not the case. But my understanding is that it's more of a contingency in the event there's a cost increase. One other event that has happened since July 2018 is that Metro has awarded a contract for Division 20, which is a storage and turnback facility for the subway. Because we're opening the subway sections earlier than anticipated, and there's more cars than initially anticipated, we're building a very large storage and turnback facility here at Metro, and that facility is eligible for Measure R and Measure M subway funds. And it's still to be determined if funding is going to be needed for that project. And so that project can take money from any of the subway sections, right? Because it's a support facility. So that might be a project that could utilize the 200 million surplus from Expo 2. But as I said initially, I do not think the 200 million was earmarked for West Side 2. It's more of a contingency. But if that's not the case, I will definitely let you know.
Yeah, can you circle back with a firmer number about what is actually available to the COG for reprogramming? Because again, my understanding is that there isn't actually any money, and I don't want to have the COGs, get excited about money that isn't actually available. So it'd be great to have a more defined number.
I will do that.
Great, thank you. And I'm hearing a little bit of background noise, so it sounds like somebody who's not talking is not on mute. If you want to mute that, that would be helpful. Were there other questions or comments or any email correspondence on this item?
This is Riley from Westside City's COG staff. No comments, no public comments.
Okay. Great. And in terms of it sounds like we need a little bit of clarification to make sure that we've got the right numbers and the right information. It sounds like we have a little bit of time for feedback, but at the same time, not the sooner the better is the message I'm getting. So what additional direction do you need, Winnie, from the board, if any?
If Craig is looking for any written comments and feedback, if that needs to be collective from the board itself, and if so, what should that message entail? And does that need, I'm looking at Lauren, does that need a vote? Because our next meeting won't be until June 11th.
I think that you can get input for a letter today and maybe show it to the chair before it goes out. And I don't think that requires a vote. You can get sort of some collective input.
Mm-hmm. Do we have a collective input from all of the board members today?
The most concrete I heard was from Kevin just
John.
reiterating what our current priorities have been laid out. That was seconded by John, and I agree. Were there any other board members who wish to weigh in? And did you want to maybe reiterate that, Kevin, just to remind folks?
Well, it's pretty simple. We've already affirmed 2 priorities for us as a West Side COG. One is the extension to West Hollywood, and the other is making the subway to the sea actually go there. So let's just reaffirm that on a letter to Metro.
Any objections?
Beverly Hills, you good with that?
I'm okay with that, yes.
Sounds good. West Hollywood, we know. LA City or LA County?
Fernando, and I think the only representatives from the cities are staff, Debbie Dinah Harris from Koretz's office and Eric Burns from Bonin's office. But Fernando, I'll start with you.
I believe that it would probably be appropriate to abstain on my end from the supervisor. I didn't know, so I wasn't able to consult specifically what would be recommended.
Okay. All right, so I'm sorry, Lauren, should we vote on this, or is that just general direction enough?
I think general direction to write a letter, and then the chair can just review it before it goes out. There seems to be a pretty good consensus of existing priorities and what it should say.
Exactly. Yeah, great. All right. Well, thank you. And thank you, Craig, for the presentation. We appreciate it. And including the follow-up with some more precise numbers at the end. That would be great.
My pleasure.
Thanks.
Look forward to hearing from you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, mobility study presentation.
Yes, so I'm keeping track of time. We anticipate that this presentation will take 20 minutes. So hopefully Chelsea from Fear and Pierce can expedite this. And then after that, we have a COVID-19 discussion. So I wanted to see in terms of time, can we extend the time beyond 1:15 a little bit, just because we're dealing with a unique situation with a virtual meeting and technical difficulties. How do people feel about that?
It's not like we have lots of places to go.
Okay. We'll play by ear.
Class to get prepared for at, I got to be there at about 1:45. So okay. I am going to have to get off at some point. Maybe we could ask the presentation to be a little shorter than 20 minutes.
Okay. Hopefully, Chelsea, you can accommodate that. I am going to share my screen, and Chelsea, if you can unmute yourself and let me know when to turn to the next slide.
Great. I'm not seeing the presentation quite yet.
Got to share the screen, that's why.
I can definitely make this quicker than 20 minutes. Hopefully none of this material is brand new to anyone. I know there's been a lot of coordination happening behind the scenes at each individual city. So this may be things you're already familiar with and have already seen, and we can just go through fast and get to questions. So as you all know, we have a mobility study underway. We've been working on this since the end of December when we kicked off. And I think you're all probably very familiar with the background of the study when you can go to the next slide. So this just shows sort of the introduction around why we're doing the study, why you all have commissioned this study to update the 2003 document and make sure that the priorities for the mobility and transportation realm are updated and documented to reflect new conditions, and also just make sure that the ongoing priorities are documented by the COG. Next slide. So this is just an overview of the study area. It shows all of the member cities relative to one another, and also shows that the goal of the study really is to set the priorities down so that the next step of the project that we are contracted to do is really to develop the Metro Multi-Year Subregional Program project list specifically for active transportation and first last mile connections. So the study itself won't necessarily have a project list embedded within the study, but it will set forth the priorities in a data-driven process to develop that list as the next phase after the study is complete. And the timeline is on the next slide, Winnie. You can go to that slide. So this just shows the overall project timeline. The mobility study is anticipated to be completed by the end of June. And then following that, as I mentioned, we'll be moving into the multi-year sub-regional program project list development. And we anticipate to have that project list completed by December. And then there's an annual update scheduled for June of next year and June of the following year as well, to add and remove projects from the list as appropriate, depending on what has been built and if priorities shift from year to year slightly. We had a stakeholder survey in January of this year, and then we had our first stakeholder meeting in February. I believe many of you were there or had staff members that were there. And we're moving now quickly towards our second round of stakeholder engagement in May. We have had to pivot from what we expected to be an in-person meeting, very similar to the first meeting in February, and we're now anticipating we're going to be doing stakeholder engagement via an online platform. We expect to keep that platform open for 2 weeks in May, so I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end. And as I mentioned, the mobility study will be completed by the end of June. Next slide. So the next few slides that I'm going to share here are just some of the boards that we shared in the February meeting, reviewing sort of the history of where we've been in the West Side subregion from a mobility standpoint and where we are now. This is just a fun little, some imagery of all of the mobility options that have existed throughout the West Side over the last 100 years or so, and how far we've come, and really the more things change, the more they stay the same somehow. So some of, very similar imagery, and then some things that are very, very different as well, as you can see. Next slide. We also did a review of the 2003 mobility study. Winnie, could you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. And I wanted to share some of the maps that were from that 2003 study, which is, almost more than 15 years ago. Some of the data was from even prior to 2003, and you'll recognize many of the same patterns. And actually, as we go through the existing conditions in a couple of slides from now, I'm sorry, can you go back one? It's a little, I don't know if it's a little slow on my end, but so yes, thank you. Okay, so the arterial level of service you can see in the AM and PM peak periods were shown in the study, as well as the freeway hotspot locations. The study that we're doing now has moved away from level of service as an indicator in conjunction with a lot of the state guidance around CEQA, and certainly is something that still has value from a local circulation standpoint. But we're looking to congestion measures that are more about time delay and overall congestion levels for a corridor level as opposed to intersection level of service. Next slide. And so here are 3 more maps from that study as well, locations where congestion degrades transit service, and then some of the proposed priorities from that study, grand boulevards, which was sort of a fun concept that was discussed there, and then just general priority corridors for improvement. And many of these priority corridors have been improved, as you all know, since that 2003 time period, and many are still on the list for additional improvement as we've been going through the list being sort of a conceptual list. We're not actually developing a list right now. And the locations where congestion degrades transit service, we've also been really relying on a lot of the work that Metro has been doing around this same concept, and pulling in some of the analysis that is readily available through their studies to understand bus lines that are particularly subject to congestion on the West Side. Next slide. So moving into a comparison of some of the information from that 2003 study with some of the updated existing conditions from today, or from 2019, which is the most recent year available. We have population density and employment density shown here, and we're showing the same units of measure. So this is people per acre for both population density and people per acre for employment density, or I guess jobs per acre. And you can see that a lot of the patterns are really quite similar along the corridors, Santa Monica Boulevard, Wilshire Boulevard, really across the entire subregion, as well as Venice Boulevard and in Culver City, and then towards the southeast corner of the subregion near LAX, still sort of some employment concentration there. And there has been a little bit of a change, certainly some more areas that are popping on the 2019 maps. But by and large, same spatial patterns that we're seeing from 2003 persist in 2019. You can go to the next slide. So as part of our existing conditions review, we've also taken a look at many of the existing and draft plans that are the guidance and the documents that all of your cities rely on for setting the local priorities and strategies in the mobility realm. So we've got TOD visioning studies in here, we have neighborhood transit plans, we have local area plans, we have bicycle and pedestrian action plans, Vision Zero action plans, just picking and choosing from around here. We have smart cities plans. And just to give you a sense of how that's different from 2003, the realm of planning documents and even modes considered in 2003 was pretty focused and limited just to vehicle movement. And so now, even just demonstrated by the wide variety of plans that are on the books for all of your cities, that really, I think, echoes some of the changing priorities for the region in that it's broadening. It needs to consider more than just vehicle movement. And that's really the direction that we're continuing to pursue for this study. Next slide. So the current conditions, we did a pretty comprehensive review of the data that's available. And so I just wanted to share a few of the existing conditions findings with you here. So from left to right on this slide is the median age by census tract, the household income, median household income by census tract, and then the number of percent of the population that has a disability. And on all of these, the scale is so, yellow, pink is the lowest grouping, and then green and blue are sort of the highest concentrations, and that's consistent throughout all of these. So the yellow areas are the areas on the map to the left where they have the lowest median age. You can see some of that popping around Westwood, unsurprisingly, and around some of the other college campuses in the area, Loyola, for example. And then some of the higher median ages in the southeast area of the region, and then up in some of the hillside areas as well. The median household income, some similar patterns with some of the the eastern part of the city of Santa Monica as some of the lower areas, and then the eastern edge of the sub-region, as well as, of course, Westwood Village, and then also by the other college campuses. And then the disability share, you can see that there's some patterns here throughout on the Wilshire corridor, and of course in the VA area, and not a lot of other areas that really pop out, some along the eastern edge of the subregion as well. Next slide. So we also looked at the mobility and access conditions. And I don't know if everyone can see, there we go. Okay, it just changed for me. So again, from left to right, the overarching patterns here, the two maps on the left are the same color scale. And I'm sorry, the middle map is actually a different color scale, where the pink is the more concentrated, the higher amounts of time, and blue is the lower amounts of time. And then on the right, all the way to the right, it just shows the transit routes that are available on the west side. So from left to right, the no car households, the blue and green areas are the ones that have a higher concentration of no car households. So households that don't have any access to a vehicle at all. The middle map is the average travel time to work. So yellow and pink are the areas that have the highest travel time to work. Green and blue on this map have lower travel times to work. And then, of course, you can see all of the wide variety of bus services that are available up through the region and to other regions surrounding as well. Next slide. Here are some more conditions, existing conditions about the mobility and access around the subregion. So on the map all the way to the left shows means of transportation to work. And I apologize, it's not coming through quite well on this slide, but the yellow dots basically show the concentration of drive to work mode share. And then the blue and green dots show the concentration of walk and bike to work mode share. And so there isn't really a huge amount of difference across this map, with the exception of Westwood Village really having a high proportion of walk to work and bike to work mode share, and then also down towards some of the other universities as well. Then the other two maps to the right, the green dot maps, are ridership maps for the bus and rail boardings. And so the middle map is weekday boardings, and the map all the way to the right is weekend boardings. We also have in our existing conditions memorandum, and it'll be included as an appendix to the study, all of the alightings as well, but we showed just the boardings in this presentation for the sake of streamlining some of the information here. So you can start to see where the highest transit corridors are, which is often overlaps just with where the best transit service is provided. Next slide. And then, as I mentioned, this study really does need to go beyond the traditional transportation mode considerations. So what we've also included is a look at, first on the left, all the way to the left are future transit enhanced network corridors. So this is based on any city that has established sort of a future facing priority for transit corridors as part of their circulation element. That's shown on this map. And then also the LA Now service area as really like a future facing transit mode that's being piloted right now. And that service area is in the bottom, outlined in that blue dashed line towards the southern half of the map, south of the expo line. The middle map is showing a snapshot of dockless mobility. So this is pulled from a new data source called the Generalized Bike Share Feed Specification. It basically is a voluntary source of data that vendors, scooter vendors and bike share vendors can upload their data to, or have a feed basically plugging in, and you can pull snapshot data to show at any moment in time where all of the scooters are around the region and around their service areas more broadly. So we just clipped it to the region here. And so it's showing sort of a hotspot map because we don't have an actual count associated with that necessarily. It's just showing where the densest where the density of scooters are at that moment in time. And those vehicles might be in use on a ride, they might be parked. The feed isn't very detailed yet. We're expecting a lot of advances in the data in this area, but right now, this is the amount of information that we have access to, really, is just to show sort of where the highest density of vehicles are at any given moment, scooter and bike share vehicles. And then in the map all the way to the right, again, Lyft and Uber data is pretty challenging to come by, but there was a study that was available that looked at LA County Lyft usage. So this is just for Lyft data. And of course, it's not just for the west side, it's for the whole county, but it shows the high, medium, and low number of trips per capita. So it's looking at it as that relationship between trips and population. And you can see just, you know, across the entire county, how much of that high number of trips per capita density is happening on the west side. So that's really the most useful thing from this map, is just to see sort of comparatively around the region, how much of that is happening on the west side. So in advance of the stakeholder meeting, we can move to the next slide, Winnie. In advance of the stakeholder meeting that we had in February, we held it at the Henry Medina parking building on Sepulveda and Expo. And we had a great turnout of about 35 folks, and it was not publicized widely to the general public, but it really was intended to be a focus group type meeting where we were hearing specific input from key stakeholders around all of the cities and subregions within the subregion to really make sure that all of the key priorities were being heard. So lots of really fantastic one-on-one conversations at this meeting. And we had it as sort of a gallery setup where folks were able to walk around the room and see all of the information and also weigh in a couple of ways, which I'll show in a minute. So we can go to the next slide. Generally, what we heard was the desire for better transit service, probably very unsurprising to this group. The desire for safer transit service, both in terms of personal safety and security, as well as vehicle safety. More efficient, more frequent, better north-south connectivity, both within the subregion and also outside the subregion to other regions north and south of the west side, as well as offering a wider variety of more creative and innovative options, such as the microtransit LA Now service and others that might be coming online soon, or might be developed or invented soon, I should say. There was also a desire for better bicycle and pedestrian facilities, particularly creating a network of bicycle and pedestrian access along corridors and across major arterials. So identifying arterials actually as a big barrier to be able to get across them, not even necessarily to use the arterials to get around. And then a general desire for better access to LAX and better access to the San Fernando Valley, as well as to other major destinations around and within the subregion, such as UCLA. Next slide. Before we had the stakeholder meeting in February, we issued a survey, a very brief survey, really meant to just get the folks that we were planning to invite to the stakeholder working group or the stakeholder focus group, thinking about some of the priorities that they wanted to come to that meeting prepared to talk about. So we had a few, it was a pretty short survey just asking generally about reactions and thoughts about West Side transportation conditions, about priorities for the region, and about sort of relative ranking. And I know the idea of relative ranking is challenging, and definitely not everything is a zero-sum game, which is what the ranking idea sort of projects. But it is helpful to think about in limited resource environment how things need to be prioritized. So this is the result of one of the questions that was a word cloud that we were able to generate based on, the top 3 words that come to mind when you think about transportation on the West Side. So you can see lots of ideas here around car-centric, dangerous, traffic congestion. So I think that probably doesn't come as a surprise to anyone on this call, but definitely underscores the need for some of the different investment priorities. So next slide shows some of these investment priorities that we asked about. So the first graph to the left shows the idea that you could have the same amount of dollars of investment be applied either in a focused manner along particular corridors or within sort of high need areas, or it could be sort of dispersed more broadly throughout the West Side region, maybe diluting the impact a little bit, but making it, sort of geographically equitable in how the money is spent. So we asked about that question, or that sort of priority trade-off. And then the middle graph shows sort of this modal priority trade-off, transit, bike, pedestrian, personal vehicle, which we consider to be your own vehicle, as well as potentially taking a TNC, an Uber or Lyft by yourself. And then low speed or 2-wheeled vehicles. So that's scooters, skateboards, all of the other sort of variety of wheeled non-bicycle vehicles that people are using to get around these days. And you can see how the survey results ranked up here. And then the graph to the right shows sort of the outcome priorities. So if we were really going to look at it absent a mode priority, but we want it to be focused on outcomes around safety improvements or around sustainability improvements or around providing just generally more options for everybody, what are those priority trade-offs here? And so you can see that safety, options, sustainability, equity, all rising to the top, cost to users as well as cost to implement, and then sort of like new technology priorities dropping to the bottom, but not a huge amount of differentiation between some of these, but safety really clearly rising to the top here. And you can see this in the gray charts onto the top right. You can just see some demographic information of the gender of our survey sample, and then how folks in our survey get around. And that was check as many options as you want, so it doesn't add up to the same number as all of the other ones, but lots of folks responding to the survey who get around on foot, by bicycle, and driving by themselves. So pretty equal share of those modes across the survey sample here. And the next slide, please. While at the meeting on the 27th of February, we asked folks to participate in these 2 input activities. The one on the left is putting dots on a map that are associated with mode choices. So you could basically pick a dot that reflects either biking, walking, or transit, and put it in the place that you want to be able to go using that mode. So some alignment between location, desire lines, and the mode choice that people want to be able to use. And then on the right, the specific corridors that people want to be able to use as bicycle corridors. And some of these already have bicycle facilities on them. So people were really doing this as a way to demonstrate that they were looking for something that was a little more safe or protected or felt more comfortable to use. So you can see some of the concentration of responses here along Westwood Boulevard for biking in particular, along the coast for biking and walking, across Venice for biking and walking, and then a lot of transit in that north-south direction, especially through West Hollywood and Beverly Hills. And a lot of that is shown similarly in that bike corridor map as well. A lot of emphasis on Westwood Boulevard as well as Santa Monica Boulevard in that perpendicular direction, and Venice Boulevard as well. So this all helps to support some of the analysis that we've been doing since that meeting. So we've been working on updating really the bicycle priority corridor, which is an effort that the COG undertook in 2012. You can go to the next slide, Winnie. Thank you. So that bicycle priority corridor list in 2012 had 5 facilities on it, and it really was intended to be a network of gap closures across the region. And many pieces of those 5 corridors have been built already. So the first pass at this update of that list was really making sure that we removed anything that's been constructed so far. And then we looked at all of the corridors that are identified in the pedestrian and bicycle plans from your cities, and also did some deep work with the task force in reviewing and adding new corridors to the list. And hopefully many of you have also been involved in that process of providing feedback through this process. So this is actually a draft list. We've received some additional feedback from some folks since this draft was finalized a couple of weeks ago that we'll be incorporating into the final version of the study a few weeks from now, or a couple of months from now. But as of this last version, we had 18 miles of new facilities and 31 miles of facilities that are partially new and partially an upgrade of existing facilities. So something like Washington Boulevard, which has some class 3 Sharrow bike lanes there, creating a really more continuous facility along the entirety of Washington Boulevard, what's labeled Corridor 12 here on the map. And you can go to the next slide, Winnie. And then beyond bicycle upgrades, which is a specific part of the scope of work just because that 2012 list exists, we're also, of course, looking at all other sorts of transportation upgrades and priorities as well. So the process that we're undertaking to really create a data-driven approach towards prioritizing transportation investment is first through this mobility needs analysis. So taking all of the information that we've assembled through that existing conditions analysis, we've created this index, which is shown here on this map. The factors and the details and the relationship of how each individual variable relates to this index is shown in that table to the left. If you want to dig into those details, they will be all fully described in the study, a technical appendix. But essentially this shows sort of a rolled up index version of where the highest need exists based on population, employment, based on where low income households are and zero vehicle households are, based on major trip generators. So large sites like LAX, like UCLA and other universities, like some of the malls and the downtown centers, really key retail locations as well for the cities. We have schools in here. We then also have the collision patterns over the last 5 years are rolled up into this index as well to show not necessarily that there's latent demand, but that there may be existing safety conditions that might benefit from some transportation investment. And then transit ridership, again, showing areas where there's high transit ridership that currently exists could really benefit from additional investment for those folks who are already riding transit, not to mention anyone who might be persuaded to ride transit if it moved a little bit faster or felt a little bit more comfortable. So these pink areas are really where we're going to be framing up our transportation investment scenarios around. And so that's the next step of the process. You can move to the next slide. So the next step of the process is really to be identifying those transportation investment scenarios and thinking about ways that incorporate all of the priorities we've heard so far and help put on paper where the future investments for the region should go. So the preliminary development of those scenarios and evaluations underway right now. And we'll be posting that forum online on the digital platform in the first 2 weeks of May. We do have a little bit of flexibility potential to extend beyond May 15th, but we are working under a tight timeline here. So we're really hoping to just have very good participation during those 2 weeks. We'll be making sure to do some outreach between now and May 1st when it launches through all of you and to all of your staff and to all of the key stakeholders in your cities. And then, as I mentioned, finalizing the study by the end of June and moving into the development of the project list. And that's all from me.
Great. Well, thank you for the presentation. We don't have a ton of time for discussion, but if there was any feedback, obviously this is going, there's a bigger timeline, so this is not the last time to give final input. But if anybody wanted to speak real quick, now's your chance.
I want to speak, Megan. It's John Heilman. So I have a couple of quick comments. Number one, in terms of the timeline, you're our consultant, correct? So we could extend this timeline if we wanted to, or am I incorrect there?
You are correct that we are your consultant.
Okay.
The grant funding that supports this study expires at the end of June, so it needs to be expended by then.
Okay, so we need to complete our expenditures by then to finish this study.
Correct.
Okay. Secondly, your survey that you showed of how people arrived and how people, it showed how many people travel in a single car, how many walk, how many were on bike. It suggests to me that your survey results are not going to be really reliable. Because when I looked at that, it looked like 75 or 70% of the people are biking. And that's not the reality of how most people get around on the west side. And I'm all in favor of expanding bike lanes, et cetera, but I don't know that we can view that as an accurate assessment of how the current mobility.
Agreed. And just to be clear, the survey was really meant just to get existing identified stakeholders in this process thinking about how they're going to prioritize or how they would prefer to prioritize investment scenarios. It was not meant to be a representative sample of the West Side by any means. And it was, the information that we showed there was mostly just informational about the split of who participated in the survey. And I completely agree that it does not demonstrate that it's a representative sample of the West Side. The other thing I'll mention just about that particular chart was it was a select as many as you like. So don't pick your priority, your singular mode that you use to get around. But if you use walking and biking or transit ever to get around, you can check as many of those as you want. So even if you're primarily a driver, but once in a while you bike to the grocery store, the people responding to the survey may have checked biking and driving. So definitely not meant to be representative. Also not a single selection. So you can't really sum across the percentages there to show, 70% of people only bike. Yeah, not meant to reflect that.
I get that, but I guess my point is that if it's not really a representative survey, then why are we using it at all in terms of influencing our data? And then my final point is that the evaluation of current conditions occurred, I think, before all the shutdown took place. And I think our conditions may go back to what they were before once we're out of lockdown, but I'm not certain about that. And it may be that there's a dramatic shift in the number of people who are now going to be working from home and telecommuting more frequently. And I think we need to at least account for that in this study.
Completely agree. Thank you.
I see Kevin raised his hand. Go
At
ahead.
first, I have to plead guilty to statistical distortion because I arrived at that February workshop on a bicycle. And there were some of us who did. One comment was there wasn't a whole lot of bicycle parking provision at that particular facility. I want to note that our mobility director from the city of Santa Monica, Francie Stephan, joined this meeting after we first did the roll call. So I want to give her a moment to collect her thoughts and see if she has any comment on this. But I want to build on what John just said about the changes we're seeing happen in our society. Not only should we be acknowledging that mobility may not go back to the old normal, I think we should be actively trying to encourage that it not go back to the old normal. I mean, this is a chance to really rethink how, when, and why people get around on the West Side. And I think that we can build on some of the observations and lessons that this pandemic has brought to us. And, along with it has come a tremendous economic impact. And part of the question is going to be, how do we get people moving again in a way to get the economy moving without getting back to what I saw was the biggest word on the word chart, which is congestion, traffic. And that just discourages people from going places earning money and doing things. So before I yield, I'd like to see if Francie had anything she wanted to add, observing what we heard today.
Thanks. Yeah, hopefully you can hear me. So I would just want to, I think I want to completely agree with Councilmember McKeown that congestion is a huge issue. We have effectively two giant walls in our West Side subregion that are the 405 and the I-10, and they certainly add commute times that are pretty extreme for a lot of people trying to get in and out of the region. So I think looking carefully at what we can do to mitigate that is really important. And when we were working as a staff team on the bike lanes, I think one of the things that we observed was that Santa Monica has a good dense network. It's spent a lot of time investing in that network, and what we're looking to try and help the region achieve is a dense network connecting to that, right? So that we fill in the gaps through West LA and some of the lines that people showed, and that we work together to strategically think about where those gaps exist and work together to support each other to fill them in. Because it's no good if a car lane disappears, and it's no good if a bike lane disappears either. And for a long time, we've lived in a world in which biking isn't desirable because your lane suddenly can end, or you can suddenly feel like your life is in danger. So I think that is a key part of what we're doing here, and I look forward to continuing to work on it.
Great. I want to be mindful of time. Obviously, we'll accept other comments, but we'll try to hurry through. And I just, Winnie, want to clarify, when the study is finalized and goes through the process, we'll set aside time for a robust discussion about it, correct? Because we're also going to have to I agree on what to do with it, right? Okay.
Right. So I also wanted to remind everyone that even though our mobility study wraps up at the end of June, we then pivot to start our Metro Measure M mobility, or MSP, multi-regional, multi-sub-regional project process. So definitely this conversation is not over, but this helps us prioritize our list of priority projects under Measure M. So we'll definitely come back. We're inviting Chelsea to come back in our June 11th meeting to highlight some of our stakeholder engagement efforts and some other additional work from the study. So Mayor McEwen, you still have your hand up. Do you want me to lower, or do you have something to say?
Yeah, that was getting tiresome holding it up that long.
Were there any final comments before we move along, or any emailed comments from the public?
Riley, were there any email comments?
No email comments.
Okay.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Thank you.
All right. Agenda item 5, Housing and Homelessness Strategic Initiative.
I'm going to be very mindful of time since it's at 1:20. I want to give you all some time to talk about COVID, and this kind of ties into that discussion. So very briefly, our homelessness committee has been very busy in addressing the pandemic. The county has been allocating us, our sub-regional COG, $42,000 for hygiene needs, which includes sanitation stations to portable toilets, or anything that we can do to use our public facilities or encourage private businesses to allow people experiencing homelessness to use the restrooms. And we decided collectively that the money is available now and we need to act quick. So we are splitting that evenly among the cities of Beverly Hills, Culver City, Santa Monica, and West Hollywood. And also wanted to mention that we also have additional funding from the County Homelessness Initiative, which includes $685,000 for our COG, which came from actually some carryover funds from Measure H back in 2008. So this is a one-time fund for us, which we can use to either put towards interim housing or to enhance our services within the West Side. So we'll be working with our committee between now and our next meeting in June to come up with a plan and how we a good way to use that fund. Preliminary discussions included enhancing our outreach teams across the entire state region. So we will be looking at that and present to you a proposal in the June meeting. So with that said, are there any questions related to homelessness and the funding opportunities I just mentioned? Hearing and seeing none, I think we can kind of transition this discussion to COVID-19. So in the packet, I think in the interest of time, thank you to the city staff for helping me on this. And I know every day the news is changing about some of our protocols and whatnot, but we did our best to outline what every city is doing regarding our residents, our businesses, and homelessness in our public facilities. We asked that we use this time to talk about some of the gaps and needs that we would like to advocate from the state and federal government to address the pandemic, and also to see if there are any regional collaboration that we can come together and discuss that. So I think we'll open up for discussion. So I think the first person who raised his hand is Mayor McEwen.
And I did so because I want to thank everybody from all of our Westside COG cities. Our city managers have been working together. We've worked very cooperatively so far. And I really do appreciate that. It's made a big difference because, of course, this is a global issue. For each of us to deal with it individually in our few square miles is very difficult. At least by dealing with things regionally, we have a consistent message for the public. And I think that's been really important because people are starving for accurate information and are quite fearful. And that's something I've had to recognize in dealing with members of the public who sometimes in the midst of this emergency may seem hostile. I have to realize they're scared. I think we all have reason to be scared for all sorts of different reasons. There are two things I'll mention that I think we need to think about. One is the availability of testing as more testing becomes available. Because I'm hearing from residents in Santa Monica how frustrated they are that the LA City and LA County test centers are not nearby, and some of them are mobility challenged even in the best of times, let alone now to go have a test. The other thing where it's essential that we all work together is to get state and federal funding to fill the gaps in our budget, not just for the expenses we're incurring directly to fight COVID, because I think those will all be pretty well reimbursable as long as we keep accurate records. And I trust that all of our cities are keeping accurate records. But I can tell you from the status of Santa Monica that this is devastating to our budget. Between now and the end of this fiscal year, we anticipate being down $72 million. And for the next fiscal year, we're down $154 million by the best projections we can make. And like all of you, we have to adopt a balanced budget. We don't get to print money. So this means that there's not a question of whether we'll have to reduce services. It's how much and where we're going to have to reduce services. On Tuesday night, our council already adopted a voluntary early retirement plan to help get the payroll down. On May 5th, we'll have a public hearing on exactly where we're going to have to make some very severe and painful cuts. And frankly, the amount of money coming to us right now from the state and the federal government just isn't going to cut it. Even the best bill I've heard of would cover maybe a third of the hole we anticipate in next year's budget. So I think as a COG, and then working together with other cities, we really have to advocate for federal funding to keep us from having to let a lot of our workforce go, create unemployment, and be unable to provide the services we want to our residents.
Yeah, ditto.
Megan, can I jump in?
Please do.
I don't know how other people are dealing with this, but one of the issues that has come up, this is a smaller issue, is that the sheriffs will no longer use force if they're dealing with a homeless individual. And we have a problem with several people who are homeless and don't understand hygiene and are dragging garbage through the city. And we need to be able to intervene, but I don't know if anyone else is dealing with the situation and how they're handling it.
Go ahead, Jim.
Well, that is really a big problem because, you know, if we're citing people out, but that doesn't mean anything. And so what do you do? It's dangerous and very concerning that we can't really do anything with our folks that are homeless and mentally ill. Even the what's it called, the Project Room Key, you know, that's a voluntary service, and our people are not going to go because of their mental illness. So I really agree. That's a big concern.
In Culver City, and the difference is that we have our own PD from West Hollywood, but we have not experienced that. We've had no experience of that. So I guess individual cities are really have these different circumstances. I'm just wondering, as a COG, would there be, I'm not sure what we could do other than to continue to advocate for funding, and when we get that funding to use it in a way that really relieves all of these situations that are different from city to city, but have some underlying commonalities, of course. Yes, hi.
Hi, I was just going to say we're not quite experiencing that in Santa Monica either. And I think it's because of the consistent outreach. So our outreach teams are still out on the street. We kind of have the list of those that are most vulnerable, you know, with mental illness or substance use, and doing specific targeting around them. So just as we think about funding COG-wide, we might really want to look into a multidisciplinary team to support our cities that don't have that only have their police department or relying just on county E6 teams.
Were there other comments or questions or any? Oh, Corey, hi. Did you want to? Hi.
Hi, I just wanted to add, it's for us, it's not a funding issue. We had DMH come out last week. We had a couple people that they had already written the hold orders for. It was the same day the kind of no contact, no use of force order came down from the sheriffs. So we saw one guy get on the bus and drive away from the team that was trying to work with him. And the other one they can't work with because we know that that person will be agitated, will fight back. And we understand we want our law enforcement officials to be safe and our outreach workers to be safe and protected as well. But these are some of our most vulnerable folks that we've tried. And now it seems like one kind of string loosened in terms of getting the holds, but now we have a no contact, and understandably. So, and they're not going to go, as Jim said, they're not going to go into the hotel program. It's not a good fit for them anyway. But we can't get people hospitalized right now on any kind of hold because nobody can actually physically bring them in. And so that's the challenge we have. Ours is not so much a funding challenge, it's kind of a protocol challenge. And this time we understand that. And at the same time, these are the folks we want to get off the street as, you know, as much as possible. Thanks.
So we know that the largest mental health facility in Los Angeles is Men's Central Jail. Obviously, we're trying to decarcerate, but I guess that begs the question: are there specific facilities that deal with mental health issues and COVID at the same time? I haven't heard of any facilities that do that. That sounds like a gap, right? And so maybe that is something. I mean, Winnie, do we write a letter as a COG, or how would we try to seek some relief for this identified gap in services?
If we are in consensus with the cities, we can draft a letter from the COG. what would be helpful if the cities also themselves draft a letter that could add a little bit of weight to our letter as well. Lauren, I'm looking at you and seeing if we need, what protocols do we need? Is it similar to the other letter from item 3E where we get direction from the members now and continue the work with the city staff to draft a letter?
Yeah, let's see, is there consensus from everybody? It seems that there is.
I think there's consensus that we want to advocate for more resources generally for cities, particularly given our loss of revenue and the expenditures that we're having to make as a result of COVID.
Okay.
And a notable one is no direct funding for cities of any of our sizes. So that's a pretty obvious one.
Yeah. Mayor McEwen has his hand up.
Well, of course, I strongly advocate for our working together to ask for funding, although I'm not even sure that that's likely to come from this federal administration. And, you know, we may be tilting at a windmill there. I think a windmill is more likely than a windfall, given what's happening in Washington. But something we can do here locally is to work together to revive the West Side economy and to make the West Side vital and functional again as soon as possible. So I absolutely want to send a letter and do everything we can to ask for money, but we also need to pull together ourselves, as we have during this emergency so far, and make joint plans for recovery and do everything we can to help each other make the economy thrive again.
We can definitely agendize that in future meetings to have a standing agenda item just to discuss our approach on that related to the pandemic.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, the recovery conversation is going to be years long.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I mean, one of the things that comes up with Culver City, and I imagine your cities, is that our own tax structures are a form of weakness. You know, Prop 13 is the big elephant in California, but you know, part of that overall recovery conversation is basically tax structure, and where is there any possible way of strengthening or diversifying that on a regional basis? You know, TOT, for us, it's sales tax. We're a low property tax city. We usually get more in TOT than we do in property taxes. That's how bad it is. So yeah, I think those long-term economic conversations will be important, and sharing of best practices too. Were there any other questions, comments from anybody?
Megan, I suspect that the city managers have been communicating and will continue to communicate about the economic recovery. And I think that's something that we should empower them to have conversations and identify joint efforts that we can make on the West Side.
Absolutely, yes. Jim?
I just wonder if we could do something about testing, because all of this comes down to testing. If we could test people, we'd know what's going on. But you know, you have to have such severe symptoms to get a test. And even now, we started testing at Cedars, but I think they only tested 124 people. So I don't know if that's something that's worth doing, but that's something that would make a huge difference now. I know money's a big issue, but getting the testing is what we all need, whether you're homeless or working or whatever you are.
We found that Los Angeles has been the regional connector that LA County has not, and sorry, LA County, in terms of testing. Because they're setting up sites even outside of the city of Los Angeles and working with the nonprofit core And hopefully by tomorrow, we'll actually with them be setting up a test site in Culver City. That would be our first. But I would suggest connecting with them because they've pretty much got a system together, including a portal to determine eligibility for the testing, which, you know, as you said, the more tests that are available, the less strict those criteria become. And so there are more opportunities to test more people, which is absolutely critical. But so far from our experience, LA has definitely led on this and continues to do so.
Thank you.
All right, well, I also have another meeting coming up. So did we have, I guess we have a receive and file for the audit. And again, this will be an ongoing discussion that we'll leave room for in future agendas. But if we could move on to just have a vote to, or do we need a vote to receive and file the audit letter?
Lauren, you're on mute.
I'm looking at your agenda.
It's number
No,
7.
I don't think so. I think that's provided for informational purposes to the board.
Okay, so we receive and file the audit letter.
The letter.
Oops, sorry, you're breaking up, Winnie.
Oh no, can you hear
There
me?
we go. That's better.
Okay, great. It's just a letter from the auditor. We're working with our old auditor that we had with the city of West Hollywood as our treasurer, just stating that we're working with them. So we've been, City of Beverly Hills has been great in helping us since they're our current treasurer. So.
Great. There was a quick announcement about the deadline extension for Form 700s.
Yes, I am still missing a few. Thank you for those who have submitted online, but it is extended to June 1st. So.
Great. And future meeting location will probably be on Zoom, I expect in June.
Let me say we would have been more than happy to invite you all to Santa Monica, but under this current circumstances, we may be just seeing each other on the screen. And because we're just on the screen, I can't reach out to each of you personally, but I just want to share, I know that for all of us, this is a really hard time. Hang in there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I do appreciate any feedback on how this meeting went using Zoom webinar. So feel free to email me and let me know.
Okay, great. And for future agenda items, is it possible for folks to reach out to you, Winnie, directly? Or yeah, okay. So that's probably the best way to do it, where you can have a chance to think about it. The one suggestion today was to continue the COVID conversation. Okay, and then were there any e-public comments?
Not that I know. Riley, did any other comments come in?
Nope, no comments.
Okay.
This is Patrick with Metro. Can I just make a quick
yes.
more of an announcement? And I'll be very, very brief. Just for Metro, for both our bus and rail, we've seen substantial ridership levels. They've gone down quite a bit. For our buses, we're down 65%. We're down 75% on our rail. We have stepped up a very serious industrial grade cleaning regimen on all of our buses and rail. We've had just a few contractors and other staff. I think we're under 20 that have caught the symptoms of COVID. So that's about it. But what we're doing to still meet the demands of the riders that are out there, we're going to make some adjustments to our schedules to keep people moving. We're still looking at about 300,000 people who are probably other service workers, essential workers who are still using our system. So you probably will hear more announcements about our changes to our service very soon.
Thank you for that. Were there any final comments from anyone else? All right, well, I move to adjourn. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.